It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. President Jacob Zuma got quite a birthday party this week. While he was celebrating and dancing on the streets, over 50,000 South Africans took to the streets in the country's capital of Pretoria on Wednesday. They were demanding Zuma's resignation. The protests were organized by some of the parliamentary parties, the Economic Freedom Fighters, and the Democratic Alliance, as well as several other parties and civil society organizations. Organizers appears to have had enough of Zuma's numerous corruption scandals and the country's deteriorating economic conditions. Even former ANC allies of President Zuma, for example, President Thabo Mbeki, and former General Secretary of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, Mr. Vavi, are calling for a national ANC conference to decide how to resolve the problem of Zuma. Joining us from Johannesburg to talk about these latest developments is Patrick Bond and Trevor Ngwane. Patrick is professor of political economy at Wits University in South Africa and is the co-author of South Africa, the Present as History. He's also the co-editor of Brex, an anti-capitalist critique. And Trevor Ngwane is head of the Johannesburg United Front. Gentlemen, I thank you both for joining me today.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So, Trevor, let me begin with you. The protests in Pretoria today, what were they like, and describe the scene for us?
Well, it was a very big march, boisterous, happy, confident. It was very red because the supporters of the Economic Freedom Front dominated the march in terms of numbers. But it was also colorful in the sense that there were T-shirts of other political parties, the DA, Democratic Alliance, the Inkatha Freedom Party, COPE, ACDP, and other parties. But it was a very kind of African and black march because most of the EFF supporters, Economic Freedom Fighter supporters, are black. It was also youthful because many of those supporters are youth. It was a really fantastic march. And it was raining, but people came out in their numbers.
Now, there are many scandals around Zuma, but why were these protests detonated now?
Well, I think we're approaching what I can call a tipping point because Zuma has done a number of things, what I call political blunders, and it has come to a point where everyone can see that he's doing the wrong thing. For example, this time around, he fired the finance minister, but this is the second time in 2 years that he has fired the finance minister. The first time he fired the finance minister, the rand, our currency, took a dive. This time, he fired the finance minister, and South Africa was reduced to junk status by the rating agencies. So it's almost like people are saying enough is enough.
Now, let me get Patrick in. Patrick, Pravin Gordhan, who was the finance minister, why did Zuma fire him?
Well, it's a very good question. The theories that seem to predominate relate to Gordhan opposing the patronage that Zuma had wanted, especially a nuclear energy deal that might cost $100 billion, far, far in excess of the fiscal capacity. And the electricity company has vast overcapacity of its own. But this was a Russian-promoted deal that also was connected to an Indian family, the Gupta brothers, who are the main owners of the uranium mines. And that's one. And then related, the Guptas had tried to start their own bank through allies in South Africa. The four big banks, the white-dominated banks, had blacklisted the Guptas about a year ago. And so in this contestation for their ability to do business, the finance ministry has been one of those sites of struggle. It's considered by the world financial community to be a neoliberal, a market-oriented and fiscally austere finance ministry. For example, cutting the budget for poor people's social grants, or cutting the health budget at a very, very fragile time, more than 100 deaths related to some of those budget cuts just this year. And I think what Zuma did with his patronage bloc, going up against the neoliberal bloc, the last time, as Trevor Ngwane said, he lost because the neoliberals were able to compel the reappointment of a more neoliberal finance minister, Gordon. But this time, Zuma has felt sufficiently powerful or desperate as he enters his last 2 years of being president of the country. So this was his last gasp to take control of state capture of this huge power in the finance ministry.
Let me ask you, Trevor, I understand that the Economic Freedom Fighters, one of the main organizers of this demonstration, you saw many of them members of this new party that I think managed to get 25 votes in the parliament, seats in the parliament this last election. Give us a sense of who they are. How well aligned are they with the Democratic Alliance, and how many civil society organizations like the student movement and others are working with them in terms of these protests against Zuma?
Well, the Economic Freedom Fighters are a youthful party which started less than 3 years ago, and it is led by Julius Malema, who was the president of the African National Congress Youth League. He was expelled from the league after helping Zuma take power from the previous president, Thabo Mbeki. The program of the Economic Freedom Fighters is the nationalization of the land, it's the nationalization of the factories. They call themselves socialists. Their ideology officially is Marxism, Leninism, Panonism. Panonism is about the struggle for decolonization. They are very young and vibrant political party, and they are flamboyant, and they dominate the media here. And in parliament, they are very boisterous, and many times they've been kicked out of parliament for being irreverent. So they're a really strong new political force in South Africa.
And how aligned are they with the official opposition, the Democratic Alliance, and also how aligned is this whole group in terms of, is there such common ground that they have bonded together to oppose Zuma?
Well, the common ground is quite recent, actually, where everyone seems to be saying or uniting behind the slogan of Zuma must go. But the EFF, the fighters, in the last local government elections, which was last year in August 3, supported the DA, for example, in Johannesburg, the biggest city in South Africa, to help the DA, the Democratic Alliance, take power, where the ANC had won the vote but did not have enough seats to run the council. The EFF said they will help the DA. So in a way, the EFF's hatred of the ANC has pushed it closer to the Democratic Alliance.
Right. Now, the EFF, as you said, is a socialist party. So, Patrick, let me ask you, the ANC, of course, started as an anti-capitalist and socialist political party, but has since then, since the apartheid ended, has moved more and more to the right, embracing neoliberal programs. How did all that happen? And, what are the conditions that led to this kind of corrupt neoliberal economy in South Africa?
Well, it is, as Trevor Ngwane says, related to the teachings of Frantz Fanon, especially the theory that there's a false decolonization because you get the political kingdom, but the economic structure in most of Africa are still controlled by multinational capital, and in places like South Africa and Zimbabwe until recently by whites, settler colonial power bloc. Now, the critique, of course, of this power bloc was that they always supported apartheid. The white capital and the white racist regime were together, and they were broken because of the sanctions and the protests in the late 1980s. And in 1994, Mandela was freed, but he had to do deals with that white power bloc. the so-called Faustian pacts, especially with international finance. And that meant gradually, and then ultimately in the late 1990s, as Mandela was leaving office, the big multinationals all moved away, but they've been taking their profits out. And that is the squeeze that the credit rating agencies can use because of the desperate outflow of funds and the need to borrow and a very high foreign debt and a fairly high domestic, especially government debt. That means these credit rating agencies have been very powerful. Now that they've used their weapons this last week, Standard & Poor's and Fitch gave a junk rating to South Africa. That's in turn going to make the ANC less likely to toe the line of neoliberalism in a last-gasp attempt to keep populist support. And that's the old classic talk left, walk right. But the talk left, radical economic transformation especially, is the framing that we're going to be hearing. And as Jacob Zuma tried this week, he will blame these protesters on whites and capital who want to retain their privilege. He's already said he's being impeached. In the next couple of weeks, there may be another vote to impeach him because the South African National Congress is part of a liberation tradition that is fighting imperialism. It's part of the BRICS fighting imperialism. And he's sketched out a storyline that allows him to say he's being victimized by this residual white power bloc. And to the extent that white capitalists, international capitalists, really do want to get rid of him and they want Cyril Ramaphosa, his deputy, a billionaire in his own right, to move in as president, there's a little truth in that. But the real dilemma for Jacob Zuma today is that 50 to 100,000 people were out protesting, led by the left. And that's not just the neoliberal bloc or the corrupt patronage bloc. Now there's a third force in this political terrain as of today, which is led by the economic freedom fighters, a secular and politically powerful mass bloc that will lean left. And I think that's an incredibly interesting development in a country where most of the civil society left, trade unions, student movement, social movements, have failed to come together in the united front that everyone had expected.
Now, Patrick, I understand that there's a no confidence vote pending in Parliament as well. The ANC has called for, members of the ANC is calling for a national Congress. Will they be able to rein Zuma in and force a resignation?
I doubt it. I think this may well go to the vote. And the critical question is whether the Parliament has its own rules, and those rules force the members to have an open vote where everyone knows which way they voted. And the request, which is not going to be delayed until the Constitutional Court decides, is can they have a secret ballot? And if they do have a secret ballot, a great number of the African National Congress parliamentarians need to have at least 50 to unseat Zuma if the opposition are all united, which it looks like they are. That's the big question in the coming couple of weeks as to whether the Constitutional Court says this can be a secret ballot. If so, the power relations will change. Zuma may well have to resign in advance of knowing that he wouldn't have the support, at which point either the Speaker, if he is impeached, the Speaker of the Parliament, or perhaps the Deputy President would come in and replace him. It's a very fluid situation. And so at this point, the ball is in the court of the Constitutional Court.
And Trevor, let me give you the last word here. Give us a sense of what you're planning to do, what you're anticipating will be the demands of the ANC in terms of a resignation or demanding the resignation of Zuma, and also what kind of other protests are being planned for the coming days to sustain this kind of resistance.
The real question is, if Zuma goes, who will replace him? So we are mobilizing around that question because we don't think that many or most of the opposition parties or any of the existing ANC leaders would make matters any better for ordinary people, for the working class. The pressure in South Africa, it's a crisis of capitalism, a crisis of social democracy, in the sense that the ANC government, the government of liberation, has failed to deliver a better life for the poor, for the working class. So people are against Zuma because he represents and symbolizes that failure. And they see his corruption, as one reason why their lives are not getting better. But as the left has organized formations, we know that the finance minister, as Comrade Patrick was saying, Previn Gordhan, who was replaced, is a neoliberal. He also pushes the agenda of the rich, of the bourgeoisie, of the capitalists. So we are trying to focus on Zuma, but at the same time raise the bigger question of what kind of system, what kind of economy do we want for South Africa? An economy which can benefit the poor, which can benefit the working class. So in a way, our movement is a movement to build the power and the confidence of ordinary people to fight for a different future, a future where there is no exploitation, there is no oppression.
All right, Trevor, Patrick, I thank you both for joining us, and we look forward to ongoing reports of what's happening on the ground and hope that you can join us again. Thank you so much.
We'll see you again. Thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.